Welcome into the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is the podcast where we talk to grandfathers, adult grandchildren, and experts in areas of importance to grandfathers. Whether you're a new grandfather, a seasoned pro, or somebody interested in learning about relationships, this is the place for you. So come on in, join us as we learn together, laugh together, and support each other on the Cool Grandpa Podcast. Welcome into the Cool Grandpa Podcast. I'm so excited to have you here, and I'm excited for this chat that we're going to have to kick off 2024. Now, before we get started, I do want to just be totally open, totally honest with you guys that this is December 29th, and I've just received news that a mentor of mine is getting ready for the next phase. What I mean by that is mentor and somebody that I've known for now over 10, 11 years, Dan Miller, author of 48 Days to the Work in Life That You Love, and host of the 48 Days podcast and so many other books, so many other things that are out there, is experiencing and going through final phase of life. And so I am a little bit distracted, but I'm also a little bit inspired in that there's a challenge here for me to be able to share some of his wisdom, share some of his impact that he's had on me and my family with you. So later down the line, I'll probably do a little bit of a tribute, a little bit of a review of what he's meant to me, what he's meant to my family, what he's meant to so many other people around the globe. But that's going to be something for a different time. What I want to talk to you about are 3 different challenges that grandfathers can face. And the reason I want to talk about these is so that we can do the best we can to kind of avoid or navigate ourselves through this, so that when we have these challenges come up, they don't blow up and they don't wreck relationships. I mean, sure, as we just go through life, sometimes you do things that just irritate somebody else, or sometimes you have a misstep and you have to go back and you have to make amends, you have to talk things out. And so with these challenges, a lot of this comes down to communication. I would even say it needs to be over-communicated on both sides. So if you're a parent listening to this and you have grandparents in your life, that you need to be talking openly and honestly and frequently about some of these challenges. And then if you're a grandparent, you also need to be talking openly and honestly and frequently about what these challenges are. Now, I've been saying challenges, and what I want to do is address these 3. So number 1 is discipline. And number 2 challenge is food. And the 3rd challenge is a child's first. So when it comes to discipline, in general, what we want to do as a grandfather is really learn if the grandparents prefer you to discipline the grandkids when they're, out on a date night or away, or the kids are staying with you, or if the parents want you to wait for them to deal with the child's disobedience. Now, if the parents prefer that you don't discipline, then ask how they envision you enforcing the boundaries in your home. I mean, if you can't raise your voice, if you can't put a kid in timeout, if you can't do some of these things that, one, gets their attention so that they understand that they've crossed a boundary, and then number 2, if you can't do anything about it, then there's nothing really to prevent them from keeping up that behavior until the parents get back. So if they prefer that any discipline be handled by the parents, then you've got to ask them how you expect to enforce the boundaries, or how do they expect you as the grandfather to enforce those boundaries. So if you want to talk about discipline, then bring up specific scenarios. What if a child refuses to go to bed? What if they don't want to brush their teeth? What if they're not, eating what they're supposed to eat? What if they're just being disrespectful and ignoring you? What if they're doing things that are harming other little children, right? Once you start throwing some siblings in there, then you've got things going on where sometimes an older sibling will just do random things to younger siblings. A great example of that was over Thanksgiving when we delivered some presents to my adult son. These were kind of some heavy presents that were for my son and my daughter-in-law. One of the presents fell over, and you got to imagine these are kind of like a TV box, flat screen TV box kind of things, but there's some weight to them. The littlest grandchild, our about 18-month-old, was kind of climbing on the one that had already fallen down. The other present was standing up, and our 5-year-old grandson was basically just looking at the dad while my son was going, "Don't you flip that over on your sister." And sure enough, that's exactly what the 5-year-old did. So, at that point, he was able to go deal with the grandson about what he did to hurt his little sister. So you've got to bring up these little scenarios. You've got to figure out, what do you want us to do? And then you've got to figure out, what kind of discipline are the parents using? What's making it through to the grandkids that behavior is not where it's supposed to be or not what's expected? So some of the things that are out there is going to be, like timeouts, grounding, if they're older, maybe taking a personal item such as a phone away. And there's some other things too. One of the things you got to do, and you got to ask if they're really little kids and they're not understanding things, is do you have the freedom to swat them on the butt? And I'm not talking about beating the kids. I'm talking about using a swat on the butt to get the attention so that they stop what they're doing. And I get it. Most of the time, grandfathers, we don't want to discipline. We want to be the fun-loving. We want to be the one that even gets into a little mischief ourselves with the grandkids. But if we're watching the grandchildren, if we're babysitting, if they're over with us on a daily or weekly basis, we need to have that conversation with the parents about discipline and about what we can and can't do as far as making sure the kids remain healthy, remain, respectful, follow the rules, because you've got rules in your house and they've got rules in their house, and those rules may not be the same rules. So, being able to sit down, talk to them about what's acceptable, what's not, what do the parents want you to do when the kid's being a little snot, and just getting on the same page so that if and when you have to discipline a grandkid because you're the responsible adult, that it's not a huge blow up. There's no, hey, you crossed the line. We can't trust you with the kids anymore. You can't be around the kids. We don't want any of that. So make sure with this first challenge that you talk about discipline. The next challenge that I think a lot of grandparents and grandfathers face is food, because a lot of kids have different food sensitivities. It wasn't such a big deal when we were young. I mean, occasionally you'd hear somebody might have had a peanut allergy, but that was really rare. Nowadays, it seems like it's all over the place. How much of that's real and how much of it's, fake, I don't know. I mean, I'll give you an example. When I was working at scout camp, when we get the kids in, we'd be reviewing their physicals with them. And almost all these kids had checked off that they were allergic to poison ivy. Duh. Everybody's allergic, right? And so that's not anything unique, but all of a sudden the kids in their minds are, when we go, hey, do you have any allergies? They're bringing up poison ivy or poison sumac or poison oak, whatever that is. So that's just an example. But you need to start to have questions around food, especially as the kids start to graduate into solids, right? When it's a bottle, when it's some mushed up peas, not a big deal. But as the kids start to get older, you need to be talking with the parents about, what are the food preferences for the kids? Are chicken nuggets and some fries going to be acceptable? Do they want you to be able to give the kids a Sprite or a 7-Up, or do they don't want any sodas around? And like orange juice is and apple juice is like the most sugary drink that they want the kids to be exposed to. How do you accommodate specific eating habits? Are there food allergies and sensitivities to where if you're cooking up food in your house, you need to have a separate pan that's only exposed to certain foods? And I bring this one up. My sister has celiac disease, and really bad. So any kind of proteins, anything that can make her sick, even if it's cooked and the pan's kind of rinsed out and you're cooking her food, she can still get really sick about it. So you need to find those things out and find out if you need to have any special cookware, if you need to have anything different in your pantry to be able to handle those. The other thing, of course, is any special diets, any allergies or sensitivities. We kind of went over it, but it's making sure that you're paying attention to those, that if you're being told that they do have a peanut allergy or they do have some kind of an allergy, find out how severe it is. Is it like, it just kind of irritates their tongue and kind of swells up the tongue a little bit? Or is it like, hey, carry an EpiPen around and that sort of thing? So figure out what it is. So if they do happen to get a hold of some of that food, you know what to expect as far as reaction goes. The other part too is that you want to make sure that you're being aware of what is in those foods that you're getting. So if you take them to go get an ice cream, if you take them to go get some tacos or a cheeseburger or whatever, and they have certain kind of allergies, you need to make sure that you make the wait staff aware. You need to be sure that you're checking the ingredients, and also find out the different names for different foods, right? Because sometimes, and this goes with sugar, right? There's like 15 different names for sugar that gets hidden into ingredients. That way food companies can say, hey, we're sugar free, but then when you look at it, it's got sugar in it. You got to find out, what are the favorite meals? What are the favorite snacks? What are the favorite drinks that the children have? And then, and this goes to how many sugary foods and beverages should be allowed. I've had a podcast on where I was talking to my buddies and they had milkshakes for breakfast. And that was just what grandpa did for them. Moms and dads may not be as cool with that these days as they were when we were growing up. So find out how much sugary foods and beverages are allowed. The old adage, we're going to load them up with sugar and give them back to the parents. Well, that's a fun thing to say, but it's also kind of that's kind of a jerk move if you actually go through and do that, especially when it's getting close to bedtime. The other thing too is ask, and this goes back to discipline. What do you want me as a grandfather to do if the grandchild refuses to eat a meal or doesn't eat everything on their plate? A lot of times growing up, it was like, hey, here's the food. If you don't want to eat it, then you go hungry. And for the most part, that absolutely works. But parents might have a different approach to it, especially if they're trying something a little exotic. If it's not just, spaghetti with some butter on it, kids may be a little hesitant to try different tastes, different textures. There's a lot of things that also come into play as kids are just developing on what they like, what they don't like. So find out from the folks what you need to do if the kids refuse to sit down and eat dinner. Do you just, no treats and there's your dinner? If you want it warmed up, we can put it in the microwave. Otherwise, that's food and you eat it or you go hungry. So get on the same page with that so that, when news goes back to mom and dad about what happened when they didn't eat, it's not all of a sudden that grandpa is starving the kids. The last challenge or last thing that I want you to be aware of is, children's first. And this is huge Because with grandchildren, we can become just as excited about firsts as the parents. First words, first steps, first riding a bike. All these kinds of firsts are great, and we enjoy them, and we absolutely love them. But as grandparents, we've kind of gone through that with our kids. And as much as we enjoyed being the parent that watched, the daughter, crawl up onto the coffee table and then balance a little bit and then start to walk towards the couch or whatnot before they did a face plant. Those were special memories, and those were special things that parents really wanted to see. My advice, if you have little grandkids and they do happen to take first steps with you, maybe you don't mention that and let the parents find that out for themselves so that they experience that first. Is that kind of fibbing a little bit? Is that kind of playing in the gray area a little bit? Yeah, probably. But at the same time, what's the harm? You saw the first steps. When they come pick up the grandkids from, you watching them, or they come back from running groceries, once that grandchild does something once, they're going to start doing it again, especially when it comes to walking, especially when it comes to doing steps, especially when it comes to some of these other things. Sometimes there's just firsts that nobody's going to get back and you're going to miss. And growing up and working and being out there, there were some times I missed first. I missed first where kids were riding bikes without training wheels. I missed some first with some different things. I lived, my kids lived, everything was fine. The world kept spinning. Not a big deal. But I think from a grandparent's perspective, you want to treat these things as a big deal, especially for the parent. Let the parents decide what kind of level of excitement, what kind of level of importance they place on it. And don't you assume that something might not be as important to your son, your daughter, your son-in-law, your daughter-in-law. The other part of this too is that you might want to talk about some firsts as the kids get older, right? And some of these firsts could be something like watching Star Wars for the first time, starting with episode 4, the way that nature intended, and then moving on, some of these other ones might be Harry Potter, The Wizard of Oz, or something similar. When you expose to these kids to the first time of seeing something, as a parent, sometimes you want to sit there and you want to watch and see if the kid gets into it as much as your memories are when you saw that film. I certainly did this with Star Wars, especially when those prequels came out and my kids were little. I loved taking the kids to Star Wars. I was looking on their faces to see if they were into it as much as I was. Spoiler, they weren't. They enjoyed it, but it wasn't the same impact as it was when I was 7 years old in the theater with my buddy by ourselves watching Star Wars for the first time. It was just a different experience, different part of life. Some of these other firsts are, taking the kids to a pro or minor league sporting event. This could be something like taking grandkids over to the local junior college and seeing a baseball game where it costs you like a couple of bucks to get in. You take the grandkid over, you sit there for a few innings, they get bored and you leave. One of the big things that comes to this and that comes to mind is in that movie City Slickers. They're all talking about dads. They're all talking about these different influences and things. And I think Billy Crystal was talking about how when he went to Yankee Stadium for the first time with his dad, that walking through the tunnel, coming out, seeing the stadium, seeing the grass, seeing the players warming up, and what a special first that was to him. So be careful about doing sporting events, doing some of these things. Make sure that you're just communicating, because maybe your son and daughter, they don't care. Maybe the in-laws, don't care so much, and it's absolutely fine. They're giving you that gift of having that first with the grandchild. A couple of the other things think about as far as first time riding a train riding a ferry, going on an airplane, first time going to an amusement park or a zoo. And these are sometimes things that you can do as a multi-generational family. So you have the grandkids, you have the parents, and you have the grandparents, and you all share in these experiences. But you need to make sure that you're giving the parents as much opportunity to experience the first as they can. By talking through some of the plans that you have to create a fun moment for you and your grandchild, you might discover a great way, like I said, to create a multi-generational experience where you have all three of those generations sitting together. And, we're coming off the holiday season and Christmas season, and one of the big traditions that I love is watching a Muppets Christmas Carol. So maybe that becomes a great multi-generational tradition that you have, that the grandkids, they've seen it once and they had the whole family and everybody could really see how much they loved watching the rats do their ice skating and how much they really enjoyed seeing Miss Piggy get really upset and going after Scrooge, and how many times did Gonzo fall off of something, and how many times did Rizzo the rat do something. All of these things are great to watch, and they're great first. But remember, just as you had a bunch of firsts with your kids, you need to allow those parents to have a bunch of firsts with their children. And it doesn't mean, like I said, you can't be a part of that. It's just making sure that you're communicating what you're planning to do and finding out and listening for things like, oh, we were going to do that, or, oh, can you hold off on watching that movie until we could all watch it? Make sure you're cluing into those and make sure that you're giving that opportunity for the parents to have that first. So again, here's a couple of things that can kind of derail relationships that I hope you think about, and that I hope you use your communication lines with your children and your in-laws, that you're able to talk about what it is that you expect for discipline of those grandkids when you have to, what it is when it comes to food, what can and can't they have, what's some stuff where it's okay for grandpa to slide them an extra cookie here and there. And then also the first, you don't want to be the one that, spoils a first with the parents. If you just talk through these things, I think everything's going to work out pretty good for 2024. Look, if you have any other challenges that you think grandfathers face, that grandparents face that I haven't talked about, shoot me an email, leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to work through what those challenges are together so that we can learn to do this role even a little bit better next month. So until next time, I want you to remember to stay cool. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.